Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Amanda Knox reacts to the news of the release of the convicted killer in her roommate's death. An inside look into the Italian trials.
My prosecutors downplayed the actions of the actual killer, Rudy Guede.
An update in the case of a missing mother of 5. Could one defendant be turning on another? Will we finally have answers to what happened to Jennifer Dulos?
And the owner of a New York bar arrested again for violating coronavirus restrictions. This time, the charges are more serious.
You don't assault a police officer.
Plus, an undercover human trafficking operation catches 14 suspects. Why Major League Baseball umpire is facing charges.
You would think an ump would be the kind of guy who knows and follows the rules.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. Amanda Knox is speaking out to ABC News about the release of Rudy Guede, the only person still serving time for the death of her former roommate, MEREDITH KERCHER.
I continue to this day to be shocked that he is the forgotten killer, the one who was quietly tucked away, convicted of a lesser crime, and does not have to live with the burden of being forever associated with MEREDITH's death. I do know that many, many, many people have suffered a great deal because of what he did. I do wish that he had been fully held accountable for what he did and that he acknowledged what he did.
Knox's conviction was overturned by an Italian court. She spoke to Law and Crime Daily about how her case inspired her to work on criminal justice reform.
Throughout my trial leading up to my wrongful conviction, I genuinely believed that it was it was reasonable doubt, it was innocent until proven guilty, and I was proven wrong. That was not, the prosecution was never able to prove that I participated in this case. What they were able to do was raise enough smoke to suggest to people that there must be fire. And that is the case with all of these wrongful convictions that are happening in the United States. My prosecutors downplayed the actions of the actual killer, Rudy Guede, and they forced me into the equation by bringing up random, unverified, slanderous details that ultimately were irrelevant to the case or were simply not true. So again, we're looking at these situations where prosecutors and law enforcement are incentivized to win at all costs, to not admit fault, and in order to do so, they basically railroad innocent people.
Italian prosecutors had accused Knox and her then boyfriend of killing KERCHER with Guede's help, but only Guede's DNA was discovered at the scene. He was found guilty of murder and sexual assault.
I think that when I was going through my interrogation, the police didn't know what happened. They thought that I knew what happened, and they thought that there was some kind of sex game that went awry because there had been evidence that my roommate had been assaulted sexually, and that somehow I might know who might have done it, that I might have been involved. And if I, a young woman with no criminal record, were involved, then it must be some kind of horrendous sex game. That's the theory. And it all derived from trying to force me into a sexual assault murder equation that I certainly did not fit into.
Guede originally received a 30-year sentence that was reduced to 16 years. The court this month allowed him to finish the remaining 2 years of his sentence with community service. Here with me is attorney Terri Austin to break down this case. Terri, different country, different laws, but what are your reactions to being able to finish the last 2 years of this kind of sentence with community service?
You know, Brian, this is really difficult to accept. I mean, this was murder. This was rape and murder. And his original sentence, because it was fast-tracked to 16 years, was not long enough as far as I'm concerned. And then to get out, you know, a couple of years early to do community service, I think is an injustice to the family. So I'm not, happy with that situation. I don't think it's a good result.
Now, I can kind of guess from your tone, but let me still ask the question. Do you think this is a concept that we should replicate in America, or maybe steer far, far away of finishing a sentence with community service?
You know what? It depends. I think there are some sentences that can be commuted down to community service if in fact it's not violent, if it's not murder, but not if it's a murder case and not if the case has already been shortened because of a plea deal, so to speak. I don't think that it should be, cut out to community service. I think that they should serve their time.
Agreed. I don't think you want to paint with a broad brush. Maybe some cases can be finished with community service and definitely others shouldn't be. Thanks for that input, Terry. A man set to be executed this week for his role in the murders of 2 youth ministers was denied a stay by a federal judge. We told you about Brandon Bernard's plea for clemency last week. He was convicted in the murders of Todd and Stacey Bagley during a robbery and kidnapping at Fort Hood in 1999. The shooter in the case was executed in September. 5 of the jurors in Bernard's trial and a former prosecutor who actually fought to uphold the death sentence now believe his life should be spared. Reality star Kim Kardashian also supports the bid for clemency. Bernard's attorney wants President Trump to commute his sentence. His lawyer says they'll appeal this ruling. Next, to a tragic case of a child abuse out of Missouri, Terri Austin has more.
Brian, 4 people in southern Missouri are accused of locking a 4-year-old boy in a cage. The Stone County Sheriff's Office says the suspects lightly kept the boy in a wooden crate constructed of pallets for extended periods of time. Authorities received a 911 call last month saying the boy was unresponsive. The boy was taken to a nearby hospital, then airlifted to Kansas City. He reportedly suffered multiple injuries, abuse, and extreme malnourishment. The suspects are charged with felony child endangerment.
I've stomached a lot of hard cases, but that's a difficult one to follow. Thanks, Terry. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, an undercover sting catches a big name allegedly trying to solicit sex online. Plus, the end of a saga involving charges of prostitution against New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft and the other defendants in the case next. We turn to sports and the arrest of a suspect for breaking into the Massachusetts home of Tom Brady and his wife, Gisele Bündchen. Brooklyn police say the former Patriots player was home when the suspect walked in through an unlocked door. Police arrested Zanini Sinas after finding him laying on a couch in the middle of the basement. Sinas was charged last year with stealing Tom Brady's jersey worth $10,000 from the Patriots Hall of Fame. Brady and his wife still own the home, but are currently living in Florida. And now to the boxing ring, where Terri Austin has an update on a case we've been following on Law and Crime Daily.
That's right, Brian. Boxer Adrien Broner was back in court in Cleveland over $860,000 he owes a woman he assaulted. Broner hasn't paid the judgment, and the judge in the case isn't happy about it. During a hearing, she made him answer questions under oath about cars he owned after threatening to hold him in contempt for a second time. Broner told the judge he had a big fight in January, which would allow him to pay the money, but he now admits that's not true. Broner has until next week to provide information to the judge about his finances.
You got to put your money where your mouth is there. We move to Florida, where 2 plea deals ended the alleged prostitution ring case that involved Patriots owner Robert Kraft. Employees at the Orchard of Asia Day Spa, Li Wang and Sheng Mingbi, agreed to plead guilty to 1 misdemeanor charge of soliciting prostitution. Prosecutors were forced to drop charges against the NFL owner after the judge threw out police undercover video. The women were sentenced to probation in order to pay several $1,000s in fines. 14 men face charges in Ohio after being busted in a human trafficking sting, and one of them works for the Major League Baseball organization. Law and Crime's Angenette Levy is here with me, giving details on the sting and the high-profile arrest.
Yeah, Brian, these men were all arrested over the weekend in a one-day internet sex sting. One is from Pennsylvania and another is from North Carolina. And then there is another one who's actually from the Youngstown area in northeastern Ohio. His name is Brian Buckmire. He's a 57-year-old umpire for Major League Baseball. He's been with the league for 20 years now. Buckmire and the other men are charged with 2 misdemeanors each. Those are soliciting and possession of criminal tools. Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost says this is part of his effort to stop human trafficking in Ohio.
Look, there is no human trafficking without somebody willing to put dollars on the table. If the Johns suddenly stopped buying sex, human trafficking would dry up overnight. So it's important to hit both sides of this. This was a demand side operation, and we're really proud of our law enforcement partners that conducted it. Every time you go out to buy sex in Ohio from another human being, you're risking being complicit in this terrible modern day slavery.
And I reached out to Major League Baseball for a comment on Brian Buckmire. So far, they have not gotten back to me. Brian?
Now, Angenette, this was the second sting this fall that the Attorney General's office took part in, right?
Yeah, that's right, Brian. They have really made this a priority in Ohio. You may recall back in October, we told you about Operation Autumn Hope. In that instance, in that sting, 45 missing children were recovered and 179 people were arrested. So the Attorney General again reiterated today that stopping human trafficking in Ohio is one of his top priorities. Back to you.
Thanks for the update out of Ohio, Angenette. Terry, let's jump right in here. Ohio is cracking down on Johns, but we've seen cases like this fall apart and those who are trafficked end up being prosecuted. Do you think this is a strikeout for the 14 defendants?
You know, I don't think it's a strikeout for the 14 defendants, but it's going to be a home run for the prosecution if, in fact, there is some surveillance tape that was properly secured with a search warrant. Maybe this could really be good. And, you know, we know from reports that these individuals were arrested when they arrived at a local hotel to pay for sex. If any of that was caught on tape, maybe there is some surveillance footage that they can pick up. That would be really great for the prosecution to really take this case to court.
Yeah, but aren't these 14 defendants kind of caught red-handed? If that's the situation, they're online, they're saying, hey, I want to come over, I'll meet you at such and such place, then they're found at such and such place. That seems pretty damning there, isn't it?
I could not agree with you more. That's why I say it's a home run for the prosecution. I think that it is extremely damning and that they would strike out as far as the defendants are concerned, because they would be going to jail, because I definitely think that if they have any surveillance at all whatsoever, they're in trouble.
Couldn't agree more. And since I'm out of baseball puns, let's move on. When we come back, why the owner of a New York bar is accused of trying to run over a sheriff's deputy. And later, suspects in the case of a missing Connecticut mother appear to be pointing the finger at each other. Do the police have a jailhouse informant? The owner of a Staten Island bar is accused of ramming into a deputy trying to arrest him for defying coronavirus restrictions. Danny Presti of Max Public House was already facing charges for allowing crowds of patrons to eat and drink inside. The owner declared the bar an autonomous zone. The New York City Sheriff's Department says deputies went to arrest him for a second time when Presti fled to his Jeep and drove with the deputy clinging to the hood. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo had harsh words for his supporters.
A person who drove his car into a law enforcement officer, drove 100 yards with the law enforcement officer clinging to the hood for his life, and that's who they're championing? That's who they're championing? Someone who attacked a law enforcement officer? You don't attack the NYPD. You don't do it. They're putting their life on the line. You don't attack them. You don't attack a law enforcement officer who's doing his or her job. And when you have someone who drives their car into someone, could have killed him, hospitalizes him, how dare you? What signal are you sending?
So harsh words from the governor for his supporters, but Terry, I'm thinking more of the Staten Island prosecutor who didn't request bail in this case. I practice in this state. I practice in this city. Staten Island comes hard when it comes to protecting their officers. This is blowing my mind. What are your thoughts on how this case is being prosecuted so far?
Well, Staten Island is like a country in and of itself. It's not quite like the city. It's not quite like the state. You heard Governor Cuomo, and he came down hard against an individual who is attempting to assault a police officer and in fact does assault a police officer. And the fact that the prosecution isn't going after this much, more aggressively is very difficult to accept. And, the bail situation is even harder to accept. They should be going after this very hard.
And let me put it this way as a public defender. I support the bail reform. I get it. He's going to come back to court. He's a small business owner in Staten Island. I don't think he's going to flee the country or the state. He'll come back to court. But does this seem like unequal treatment for different people when it comes to assaulting an officer, a Class D felony in the state where you can do 15 years in jail? It doesn't seem like everyone's getting the same treatment.
Listen, I am definitely not a conspiracy theorist, but I guarantee you, if the person behind the wheel had been a person of color and rammed that Jeep or car into a police officer and dragged him for a little bit, that tape showed that the police officer was going for a while. That police officer and his partner might have, opened fire, and we wouldn't be in this exact same situation. So I definitely think that the individual driving Presti, he got some preferential treatment there because of who he is.
And from my understanding, this officer did suffer serious injuries. It's not just a crime because of who he injured, but the fact of the injury. I think like injuries to his legs, like broken bones. So wishing him a speedy recovery. But the case still seems very curious as to how the prosecutor's office is handling it. When we come back, new developments in the case of a mother missing for more than a year. Her husband is dead. Could his friend be revealing information? The story after the break. One of the suspects implicated in the disappearance and assumed death of a Connecticut mother says that another defendant has flipped. Jennifer Doulos has been missing since May of 2019. Her estranged husband, Photos Doulos, was charged with her murder, but maintained his innocence. He died by an apparent suicide earlier this year. His former girlfriend, Michelle TROCONIS, as well as his friend and former attorney, Kent Mahoney, are facing conspiracy charges in this case. Michelle TROCONIS' attorney, John Schoenhorn, is requesting any alleged confessions made by Kent Mahoney in August or September of 2020. Information about potential agreements between prosecutors and Mahoney in exchange for his cooperation. Medical records of Mahoney's head injury around the time of Jennifer's disappearance. A scientific report about a white protective suit recovered this year in a wooded area. The defense's request comes as they've previously argued that more discovery should be turned over, including photos police took of TROCONIS during a strip search.
They strip searched my client under the statute. It does say they need an order from either the chief of police or a designated supervisor to even authorize that. The fact that the court signed a search warrant allowing photographs of Ms. TROCONIS' body did not say anything about a strip search. The statutes are clear. I want to see that that was even done, number one. Number two, those pictures are missing. They're not listed as evidence. They're not stored anyway. I don't know. There's nothing that's been disclosed about where those photographs ended up. There's a state police male officer wrote a description of each of the 25 or 30, I don't have that report in front of me, photographs. So he stood there and looked at these pictures of my client semi-nude and then wrote a description of each one. I don't know where these pictures are. I don't know if they were even in a protected area. For all I know, they were passed around the state police barracks in Troop L and have been since. I have had no information on what happens to them.
Terry, TROCONIS' attorney is calling Kent Mahoney a jailhouse informant. This sounds like someone could be pointing the fingers and maybe flipping to not plant evidence, but say that this is the one who did it. Could that be disastrous for TROCONIS?
Oh, it will be disastrous for TROCONIS. If, in fact, Kent Mulvaney says that she was involved and that it was a murder and he helped dig the grave, I mean, he is definitely going to be implicating her to get a better deal for himself. So I think her attorney is doing the right thing by asking for copies of everything, including the plea deal, because he wants to see what was promised to Mulvaney and he wants to see what, in fact, was said about his client.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of hit the nail on the head of my next question. We're talking about potential promises to Mulvaney. Does that mean there's a potential plea deal for one defendant, and that defendant could be testifying against the other?
Oh, I definitely think he's going to be testifying against the other. And one of the things I thought about this case is there's very little evidence against the attorney here, against Kent Mulvaney. And, you know, they say he was digging the grave, but I have not heard that there's any sort of, you know, DNA recovered on the shovel, et cetera. So I definitely think he's going to try to take a plea, and I think he's going to talk. And, you know, Doulos is already gone. He, you know, apparent suicide. And the only one really left here is TROCONIS. And if, in fact, Kent Mulvaney can get a plea deal, I think he's going to do exactly that.
So Kent Mulvaney might know more than the rest of us. Do you think we could possibly know what happened to Jennifer Doulos after this plea deal?
You know, we know she's no longer with us just because of, you know, the blood and all of that that was found. But I think we will finally determine what exactly happened to her, because we haven't heard those details, and I'm hoping we do.
Thanks, Terry, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.